So you're looking for the best, lightweight, most travel-ready gimbal for your mirrorless full-frame camera? Well, today we have a new option that you might want to look at, and that is the Weebill Cineeper.
We about to change the game. We out here taking names. Let our voices rise. Let them reach the skies. We about to change the game. We out here taking names. Let our voices rise. Let them reach.
So the Cineeper is the newest gimbal in Zhiyun's Weebill gimbal lineup. And a few months ago, I did a review video on the Zhiyun Weebill 3S. And the Cineeper is kind of the little brother to the 3S in the Weebill lineup. And that's pretty interesting because the Weebill lineup and the Weebill 3S, that's already the kind of compact and travel-friendly, easy to take with you portable line of gimbals for Zhiyun. And this new Cineeper takes that to an even new level. And so I'm not going to go through all of the specs and everything like I did in that 3S video. If you are interested in learning more of the specific details, I will leave that video, the full review of the 3S, linked here. But today I'm going to look at more of, first of all, what can the Cineeper do? And what are going to be the differences between these two? If you're leaning somewhere in between the 3S and the Cineeper, which one is going to be right for you and why? So I've always been impressed by the Weebill lineup and how much weight, how big of a camera setup they can support in relative terms to how big or how small of a gimbal they actually are in that series. And with the 3S, using my full frame Canon mirrorless cameras, using my biggest lenses, I didn't find any problems with being able to balance that gimbal no matter what setup I was using. It was able to handle it without any issues. I didn't ever notice it even really struggling. Very powerful motors. And that's the first difference I noticed with the Cineeper. The Cineeper itself is lighter, and the capacity, the weight load that it can handle is a little lighter as well. Now, I was still using my full frame Canon mirrorless cameras, and I still use several of my big lenses on there, but there were in certain situations, specifically the first time I noticed it was when I had my RF 24 to 105 millimeter f4L lens. So that's a relatively bigger zoom lens. And when I had it zoomed all the way out, in certain angles, especially when I was having the camera pointed straight down, in those situations, the motor started to shake for a minute and then just kind of give the message that it was turning off because it couldn't handle that amount of weight. I will say, even when I was using the 24 to 105 zoomed more out to 85 millimeters, which is where I started, and anything between 24 and 85, I actually didn't run into any problems. It was just at that far end. And I think realistically, probably more so than the motor's weight capacity, what I was running into there was how unbalanced it was and the motor's ability to compensate for that unbalanced weight when it was zoomed all the way out. Nevertheless, that is something that you will have to keep in mind. So I think if you're looking between the 3S and the Cineeper, the first big question is how big are the rigs that you're trying to run on these gimbals going to be? And I think if you are going to be using a bigger setup, and by bigger setup I mean full frame mirrorless camera with longer lenses, larger, chunkier zoom lenses, something like that, and still want a very travel-friendly, portable, lightweight gimbal, the 3S is probably the one to go with. If, on the other hand, you're running lightweight travel type of rigs and you also want your gimbal to be as lightweight and travel-friendly as possible, then that's where the Cineeper really shines. Because again, the Cineeper is lighter, and except for those cases where, for me, really the only case that I ran into an issue was the 24 to 105 zoomed out all the way to 105 millimeters. That was the only thing that it couldn't handle. So lighter lenses, smaller lenses, anything that somebody would kind of think of as a more travel-friendly camera setup anyway, the Cineeper is going to have no problem handling that. And again, because it's lighter, a little bit smaller, but the dimensions I will say are actually very, very similar. It's the weight where you see the difference between the 3S and the Cineeper, but the Cineeper is going to save you on weight, and it's going to handle lightweight setups without any problem. And to clarify, when I say smaller, I'm talking about smaller full frame mirrorless setups. If you're using a mirrorless APS-C setup or Micro Four Thirds, or even something smaller like certainly a point and shoot, you're not going to really be able to outrun the motors, I don't think, without having some ridiculous like an APS-C camera with a 600mm full frame lens on the front of it. But in realistic usage, I don't think with a smaller sensored mirrorless camera you're going to run into any problems, regardless of what kind of, again, realistic lens you're using in combination with that smaller sensor. But outside of the weight capacity and the weight differences itself, these two gimbals are extremely similar. If you're wanting to be like a power user and go in and have all the different settings and have the most settings available for you, there are a few settings that the 3S has that the Cineeper doesn't have. But honestly, I'm not even really going to talk about those in this video because it's all stuff that I don't use and frankly didn't use or tried to use on either of these gimbals. So I will say, if you are a power user, someone who wants to get in and have the most control, the 3S is going to give you more things that you can control, slightly, at least in my feelings of it. It's not very many things or anything that I needed to change that I couldn't do on the Cineeper that I could do on the 3S. But if you want that control, that extra amount of features, it's in the 3S, not the Cineeper. Otherwise, the functionality, even just the feel of using these two gimbals and how that's going to look in your workflow is extremely similar. And I think for most people, it's going to be a question of weight. First of all, how much weight are you willing to lug around in your backpack or your camera bag or whatever for the actual gimbal itself? And will saving that little bit of weight be a big thing for you? And on the other side of that, how much weight are you going to try to have on the gimbal itself? And I think that's really going to come down to what your usage is. My take on this from a usage perspective is the Cineeper seems like a gimbal that is made to be the travel photographer, travel videographer, travel vlogger, travel YouTuber, somebody who is doing content on the run, having to have everything in one camera bag. That person, this is going to be perfect for, because that person is probably not going to want to have large, heavy lenses anyway. And so their setup that they're using is already going to be relatively light. And with that, the Cineeper will have absolutely no problem. And you're saving a little bit of weight when you're adding the gimbal into the rest of that camera equipment as well. So I think for that usage case, the Cineeper is probably perfect. For someone who maybe wants a little bit more functionality, maybe you are using slightly bigger setups like a full frame camera with a f1.2 lens on the front of it, or a full frame mirrorless camera with a longer zoom like the 24-105, something heavier that has some more weight at the far end of it. That might be something where you would want the 3S. Another thing to think about is if you're just not so worried about saving that bit of extra weight in the gimbal itself, then the 3S could be compelling because you do have that extra functionality. And if you are using slightly heavier rigs, like a full frame camera with a big f1.2 prime lens or an f2.8 chunkier zoom lens, something like that, the 3S is not going to struggle with that at all. Whereas at the extreme ends, the Cineeper might not keep up with that, and certainly is not going to keep up with that quite as well as the 3S would. But at the end of the day, for me, I still continue to really enjoy the Weebill lineup of gimbals in general. And I think both of these gimbals are great to use. I've enjoyed using them and will continue to use them anytime that I'm wanting that gimbal look with that nice smooth footage. And in my personal situation, I have both, and when I go on shoots where I'm trying to get gimbal shots, I'm probably, in a lot of the cases, going to have both of them with 2 different setups so that I can have maybe an 85 on one and a 35 on the other and be able to switch back and forth and not have to worry about switching lenses out in between, which I will say with these Weebill gimbals, switching lenses is not that big of a deal, and being able to rebalance that gimbal goes really fast. But then you're still saving a few seconds on the shoot, and you can switch in and out or just use both at the same time if you have 2 people to run the cameras and you can get 2 cameras in there for whatever shot that looks like. But I think probably if you're watching this comparison video, you're trying to decide between the 2. And I think, again, it really comes down to how important is cutting down on the weight to you. If that is very important, then the Cineeper is probably the way to go, and that's probably not going to be an issue because you've probably also cut down on the weight of your camera setup. If that's not so much an issue and maybe you want something that's travel friendly, lightweight, but also has the maximum capacity that you can get in a smaller lightweight gimbal setup, I would say the 3S is the thing that you should look at in that case. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think about these 2 gimbals? Have you used either or both of them? Which one are you leaning towards if you're looking at getting one? Or if you've already made the decision, which choice did you make? Thanks for checking out the video. See ya.
We about to change the game. We out here taking names.